Okay, let's dive into this. We've got a collection of sources here that chronicle an absolutely devastating crime that unfolded in upstate New York. It spans several months, starting around December 2024, with everything coming to light in February 2025.
Yeah, the case described in these materials, it centers on the torture and murder of a young man, Sam Nordquist. And investigators, well, the quotes in the text show they didn't mince words. They called what happened beyond depraved.
Right. So our goal in this deep dive is basically to take these sources and unpack them. We need to pull out the critical details, really understand the timeline they lay out, and also explore the aftermath and reflections discussed in the text itself.
And before we get into the really difficult facts of the case, the sources make sure we know who Sam was. He's described as a 24-year-old biracial black transgender man from Red Wing, Minnesota. Someone known apparently for his kindness, a genuinely big heart. He actually worked at a group home, caring for individuals with disabilities.
So, the sources tell us Sam made a journey. He went to New York in September 2024. He traveled there, it seems, to meet Precious Arzuaga, who was 38, someone he'd connected with online.
And his family, they expected him home. But when February 9th came and went and he hadn't returned, they got, understandably, deeply concerned. That's when they reported him missing.
The sources mention his family tried to get welfare checks done. And authorities, they did visit the Patty's Lodge motel where Sam had been staying. But, well, initially the sources indicate they didn't find enough right then to, take anyone into custody or really intervene decisively.
It's also quite striking how the sources capture Sam's apparent state during this period. His sister shared that on January 1st, and this would tragically be the last time the family actually heard from him. He seemed sad. That little detail, knowing what came next, it's particularly poignant.
And this is where the timeline presented in the sources, it just turns incredibly dark. Sam's body was discovered on February 13th in a field about 15 miles from that motel.
Right. And the evidence found wasn't consistent with a, very recent death. The sources reveal findings suggesting he had been subjected to weeks, literally weeks, of sustained physical and psychological torture. His death, they estimate, happened earlier, on or around February 2nd, 2025.
The details of the abuse, the things described in the sources are just horrific. They're really difficult to even talk about. They paint this picture of systematic torture. Beatings with belts, sticks, ropes, being forced to ingest bodily fluids.
Yeah, and the sources add more. Torture using a table leg and a broomstick, starvation, sexual assault, and even having bleach poured on him. The sheer level of brutality had led police to describe it, and this is a quote, as by far the worst case they had ever witnessed, one of the worst homicides they'd investigated.
And what's particularly chilling, something highlighted by prosecutors in the sources, is that the torture allegedly included the coerced participation of 2 children, kids aged 7 and 12. That just adds an almost unthinkable layer of depravity to what's already horrifying.
So as these grim facts started surfacing through the investigation, the focus obviously turned to finding and apprehending those responsible. The sources detail that initial wave of arrests. They named 5 individuals: Precious Arzuaga, Jennifer Keano, Kyle Sage, Patrick Goodwin, and Emily Matika.
But the material shows the investigation didn't actually stop there. 2 more people were charged later, Thomas Eves and Kimberly Sokia. So that brought the total number of people facing charges up to 7.
And the charges, detailed for all 7, are extensive. They're severe. We're talking first-degree murder, kidnapping, conspiracy, child endangerment, and concealment of a corpse. Understanding conspiracy here, as the sources present it, suggests, a pre-planned agreement to commit these awful acts.
And concealment of a corpse obviously speaks to the attempt to hide the crime itself.
Exactly.
Now, a significant discussion that comes up in the sources revolves around whether this case should be classified as a hate crime. What does the material present on that front? It seems complex.
It is complex. The sources lay out the authorities' initial position. They explain that even though Sam was transgender and black, there wasn't clear indication to them that it met the specific legal criteria for a hate crime designation.
And what was their reasoning, according to the text?
Well, their reasoning, as described, hinged on the fact that none of the suspects were strangers to Sam. In fact, at least one reportedly lived with him. The implication in the sources is that those legal definitions often focus on animus based on identity driving an attack by a stranger, or maybe someone with documented prior hate aimed at the victim's identity.
Right. But the sources also powerfully present the counterpoint. Many people argued looking at the sheer unimaginable brutality of the crime itself, inflicted on a black transgender person. That brutality is inherently evidence of hate, regardless of the prior relationships.
Exactly. For many people quoted or described in the sources, the intensity of the violence seemed inseparable from Sam's identity. They couldn't see it any other way.
And the community response documented in the sources, that's clearly a huge part of this story. The case just ignited widespread outrage and grief, of course.
Absolutely. The text details vigils being held across the country, not just in Sam's hometown in Minnesota, but reaching all the way to the New York State Capitol. It really highlights the broad impact this tragedy had.
You also see LGBTQ+ advocates responding forcefully. It's noted in the sources. They were demanding justice, but also condemning the case not just as some isolated incident, but as, tragically emblematic of the broader violence that transgender individuals face.
Yeah, and the sources even mentioned a petition. It apparently got over 17,000 signatures. A really clear call for the harshest possible sentences for those involved, reflecting just how deep the public anger ran.
And maybe the most impactful things in the sources are the statements from Sam's mother. She talks about her son having a heart of gold, just a truly caring person.
And her public declaration, which is captured in the text, that the perpetrators are pure evil. I mean, that speaks volumes about the profound pain and just outrage this crime caused the family and so many others.
So looking back at these sources, the picture that emerges, it's of Sam as this warm, caring person, someone whose trust was just tragically, horrifically betrayed, leading to unimaginable suffering and death, and at the hands of people he actually knew.
And his death, as it's articulated in the sources, has served as this chilling wake-up call. It starkly highlights the ongoing and often brutal violence that LGBTQ+ individuals continue to face.
The material also shows this case is fueling calls for concrete reform, from authorities even. The sources detail discussions around needing better safety protocols, maybe conducting more proactive welfare checks, especially when someone vulnerable is reported missing.
Yeah, and strengthening protections for vulnerable communities overall. It seems like the inadequacies revealed by Sam's case, like those initial checks at the motel maybe not being enough, are directly driving these specific calls for change that you see mentioned in the text.
Okay, so stepping back from the sources then. This deep dive, we've navigated the devastating timeline of Sam's journey, the horrific details of the abuse, the arrests and charges against 7 people, that really vital and difficult discussion around classifying the crime.
And also that powerful wave of community response. The grief, the anger, and the resulting calls for systemic change.
Yeah. And the sources really conclude by underscoring that Sam's memory isn't just a point of grief, right? It's become a catalyst. It's fueling countless calls for change. His story, as presented in this material, is one that absolutely must be shared and hopefully learned from.
Which really brings it to a question that seems woven through the fabric of these sources, something for you, the listener, to think about. In a society that's grappling with such profound acts of cruelty and betrayal, where vulnerability can be so deeply, terribly exploited, what is our collective responsibility, yours and mine, to look out for one another and actively work towards protecting those who are most at risk